Welcome to today's episode of our True Crime Documentaries, where we love to uncover the truth behind the most disturbing and mysterious cases. Our case on today's episode is about a notorious serial killer, Joseph Duncan Edward III. In the world of crime and violence, few names evoke as much terror and shock as Joseph Edward Duncan III. He was a serial killer who left a trail of destruction in his wake, and his brutal crimes shocked the nation. But who was Joseph Duncan, and what led him down the path of evil? Join us as we delve into the life and crimes of this infamous killer in this true crime documentary. We will explore his troubled childhood, life as a drifter, and brutal murder spree. Get ready to be taken on a journey into the dark and twisted world of Joseph Edward Duncan III.
Man's disturbing murders shocked the nation in 2005. Some call him worse than Ted Bundy. Today, Joseph Duncan is fighting his 3 death sentences.
Born on February 25, 1963, in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Joseph Edward Duncan III was the 4th of 5 siblings born to Joseph Edward Duncan Jr. and Lillian Mae Duncan. Raised in a military family, Duncan and his siblings experienced a nomadic lifestyle, moving from city to city within the United States and abroad every year or two. Eventually, his father, the elder Duncan, retired in Tacoma, Washington, and the family finally found a permanent home. Duncan's mother was known for her assertive and authoritarian personality. However, there are conflicting accounts regarding any abuse Duncan may have suffered during his childhood from his mother. Despite claiming abuse in 1980 after his arrest, his younger brother disputed these allegations. In 1979, Duncan's parents divorced, and his sisters soon left the household, leaving him behind with his mother while his brother went to live with their father. Duncan's father later remarried, and Duncan gained a stepfamily. Duncan attended Lakes High School but unfortunately did not graduate. Despite the lack of formal education, Duncan would go on to lead a life filled with tragedy and terror, eventually becoming known as one of the most notorious criminals in American history. Throughout his life, Duncan's actions were marked by violence and a complete disregard for the lives of others. It is important to remember that behind every act of evil lies a complex and often troubled individual.
Ted Bundy had nothing on this Joseph Duncan character. I mean, he is a literal monster.
Duncan had a troubled and dangerous past, with a history of violence and sexual crimes that spanned over 2 decades. His first recorded offense was a heinous act of rape in 1978, when he was just 15 years old. He threatened a 9-year-old boy with a gun and committed the horrific act, setting off a chain of events that would define the rest of his life. The following year, Duncan was arrested for driving a stolen car and sent to Jesse Dislin Boys Ranch in Tacoma. During his time there, he revealed to a therapist assigned to his case that he had already committed numerous sexual assaults on young boys. He boasted about raping 6 boys and estimated that by the time he was 16, he had sexually assaulted 13. In 1980, Duncan stole several guns from a neighbor and abducted a 14-year-old boy, committing yet another heinous act of rape at gunpoint. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for this crime and served 14 years before being released on parole in 1994. Despite the parole restrictions, Duncan continued to live a dangerous lifestyle, moving frequently in the Seattle area. In 1996, Duncan was arrested once again, this time for marijuana use, and released on parole several weeks later with new restrictions. Authorities believe that during his parole period, he murdered 3 people, Samijo White and Carmen Cubias in Seattle in 1996, and Anthony Martinez in Riverside County, California in 1997. Despite the evidence pointing towards Duncan's involvement in these cases, they remained unresolved and unattributed to him until after he was taken into custody in the Grown case. Duncan's life of crime and violence finally caught up with him in 1997 when he violated the terms of his parole and was arrested in Missouri. Due to his positive behavior during his incarceration, Duncan was granted a release from prison on July 14, 2000, after serving a reduced sentence. He moved to Fargo, North Dakota, where he became acquainted with a local businessman. In March 2005, Duncan was charged with the molestation of 2 young boys at a playground in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. He appeared before a Becker County judge, who set bail at $15,000. The businessman who he had become friends with in Fargo helped him post bail, but Duncan skipped bail and disappeared. A federal lawsuit was issued for Duncan's detainment, accusing him of evading legal proceedings through unlawful flight.
I remember just holding on to hope, but still feeling like there wasn't going to be any.
Duncan's life was a never-ending cycle of violence, crime, and danger. Despite numerous arrests and stints in prison, he continued to commit horrific acts of violence against innocent people. His actions left a trail of destruction in his wake, and he will always be remembered as a violent sexual predator who ruined the lives of countless individuals. One of his most heinous acts was the murder of the Groen family, which took place in July 2005. The events of that night shocked the nation and left an indelible mark on the families and communities affected by Duncan's actions. The Groen family consisted of Brenda Groen and Mark McKenzie, her boyfriend, along with her 3 children, 9-year-old Dylan, 8-year-old Shasta, and 13-year-old Slade. They lived in a rural area near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and were known for their warmth and kindness. However, on the night of July 2, 2005, their lives were forever changed when Joseph Duncan entered their home and committed a brutal massacre. Duncan broke into the Groens' home late at night, using a hammer to smash a window. Once inside, he bound and gagged the family members before brutally murdering Brenda and her finance. He then turned his attention to the 3 children, abducting Dylan and Shasta and leaving Slade for dead. He then kidnapped the 2 youngest children of Brenda Groen, Shasta and Dylan, and had taken them on a nightmarish journey across the country. For 6 long weeks, they were subjected to unspeakable horrors at the hands of Duncan, who repeatedly molested and tortured them. He drove long distances and stayed at 2 different campsites, where he would tell Shasta how he had brutally murdered her family members with a hammer. The memories of those moments haunted Shasta, and she would never forget the sound of Dylan's screams as Duncan subjected him to a sorrowful death. One day, as Duncan was searching for beer in a clear plastic box, the unthinkable happened. The shotgun that was kept in the same box went off, hitting Dylan in the stomach. Shasta watched in horror as Dylan begged for his life, but there was nothing she could do to save him. Duncan reloaded the shotgun, put it back to Dylan's head, and without hesitation, pulled the trigger, killing Dylan instantly. The sound of the gunshot still echoed in Shasta's mind, and the sight of Dylan's lifeless body haunts her to this day. Duncan was consumed by guilt for what he had done, and he started to cry. He told Shasta that he had only killed Dylan to put him out of his misery, but Shasta knew that was a lie. She knew that Duncan was a monster who enjoyed causing pain and suffering to others. Days later, Duncan drove Shasta towards Coeur d'Alene and stopped at Denny's restaurant, where Shasta was recognized by some people in the restaurant as she had been declared missing in the television reports. The police officers were alerted and Duncan was blocked from escaping till the police arrived. Then, Shasta was rescued and brought to safety, and Duncan was finally arrested and brought to justice for the atrocities he had committed. Shasta will never forget the horrors she faced at the hands of Duncan, but she also knows that she is a survivor, and she will never let the evil that Duncan committed define her.
Do you remember much of that night, or is it just a blur?
I remember it like it was yesterday. I can't stress enough how much, someone could not forget.
Duncan was arrested and convicted for a series of heinous crimes he had committed. He had been found guilty in 3 separate courts: the Idaho District Court for the kidnapping and murders of Brenda, Slade Groen, and Mark McKenzie, the United States District Court for the District of Idaho for the kidnapping of Shasta and Dylan Groen, and also for the murder of Dylan Groen and other crimes. He was also convicted in a California Superior Court for the kidnapping and murder of Anthony Martinez. During his time behind bars, authorities made a shocking discovery. Duncan was connected to several other unsolved murders that had taken place between 1994 and 1997 while he was on parole. This included the murder of Anthony Martinez in California and 2 young girls in Seattle. Although he was never charged in the Seattle cases, he was charged in California for the murder of Martinez. In Idaho, Duncan was given 6 life sentences for the kidnapping and murder of the 3 victims in Coeur d'Alene. The federal court convicted him of kidnapping Shasta and Dylan Groen and the murder of Dylan. He was given 3 death sentences and 3 life sentences for these crimes. In California, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences for the kidnapping and murder of Martinez. The nation was horrified by Duncan's crimes, and many were left wondering how someone could commit such horrific acts. But despite the sentences, he would never be able to bring back the lives that he took, and the families of his victims would never truly find closure.
According to court documents, Duncan has terminal brain cancer as he sits on death row. He was convicted.
In March 2021, news emerged that the notorious criminal, Duncan, was facing his final days. Court documents revealed that he had been diagnosed with stage IV brain cancer, glioblastoma, in October 2020 and underwent brain surgery soon after. Despite the severity of his condition, Duncan refused any further treatment, opting out of both chemotherapy and radiation therapy. By November 2020, medical staff at the Federal Bureau of Prisons estimated that he had only a few months left to live. On March 28, 2021, Duncan's time finally ran out, and he passed away at the age of 58. The news was met with a mix of emotions, with some feeling relief that his reign of terror had finally come to an end, while others felt that justice had not been fully served. Duncan's crimes were a tragedy for the families of his victims and a shock to society as a whole. The thought that one individual could commit such atrocities is difficult to comprehend. However, despite the atrocities he committed, we must remain vigilant in our efforts to prevent similar acts from taking place in the future. To this end, we must strive to understand the underlying causes of violent behavior and work to intervene before it's too late. By doing so, we can work to create a safer and more just society for all. Thank you for joining us on today's episode as we discussed the disturbing case of Joseph Duncan. We hope this documentary shed some light on the heinous criminal atrocities committed by Duncan. Don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to our YouTube channel for more in-depth discussions on the most controversial and intriguing criminal cases. Until next time, stay tuned for more gripping true crime documentaries.